The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below.
Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor, Thomas Goss, welcoming you to the 9th collection of evaluations for website entries in the 2021 Orchestration Challenge. It is a bit of a lazy Saturday morning here in New Zealand. Probably this video will be released in a few days, maybe on a Sunday in the Western Hemisphere. But for now, I'm just kind of having a slow start, gradually getting into it, but there is kind of no way that I'm going to be able to finish all of this stuff on time and continue to run the channel and do all the other things I need to do in my career unless I just do this every day. And you know something that is fine because I'm really loving this. This is great. This is one of the best times of year for me, even though I've got to say, with the amount of entries climbing, it is getting a bit stressful. So, all the same, just looking at this entry by Gustavo, once again, it just brings a smile to my face. It's got such great life and energy and colors in it, and any way that I can help to make it a little bit more feasible, a little bit more workable, maybe to up your level of craft, then I am happy to do that. So let's jump right into it. And actually, wait, I have one last little, or one more little thing to say before evaluating all 6 of these entries, and that is, it would be really, really great if everybody in this video had something constructive to say, even if it's just it's telling somebody how much you liked their entry. But, it would be really great if all the people on this video could comment on each other's entries in the comments below here on the YouTube page, or, if they are in the Facebook group, commenting there, or on, or maybe even on Twitter, where I'm going to be posting this. So, anyhow, but yeah, probably the YouTube page is the best for everybody to read. So, having said that, let's take a look at this entry. So, I've got my list of evaluation criteria. However, before I get into that too much, let's talk about the use of the harp. Okay, it's because I need to make this a little clearer, I think. In a big, massive tutti like this, this is not a true tutti because I'm not really using all instruments, right? Tutti just means all, right? But it's still pretty big scoring. And in here, of course, we are using everybody who's available. All right. In that kind of scoring, harp has basically got no chance unless one of 3 strategies is taken. The first one would be glissandos, right? Glissando cuts through because of the many different notes rippling across the texture. But, of course, you can have a really screaming texture and just barely be able to hear that glissando. The other thing is huge rolled chords, right? If you have big, huge rolled chords, the rolling of the chords across the beat, that also provides some way for the audience to hear the harp. And then the third possible option is if there is somewhere in the sound picture in which the harp can play some kind of pattern or recurring figure or so on, that usually above the sound picture, but there really isn't a whole lot of room because you've got piccolo notes all the way up to B there and then E and so on. So you're really not giving yourself any acoustic space in which the harp can really contribute. So here, like, if these were way bigger chords and you didn't give them the bracket, which means no rolling, right? So like the no rolling bracket is actually working against the ability of the harp to be heard here. So that is a problem, right? So if these were big, huge, gushing rolls, and I would say like, big 3 to 4 fingered chords in either hand, and like maybe I would say don't go overboard with it, but if you had like a 3-handed roll, going left, right, left, because the tempo is so fast that there isn't really room to do something big like that. But you would have a better chance of this coming through. And then, of course, you'd want to reduce the volume of some of these, or the dynamics, right? You'd want everything to be forte and the harp to be fortissimo, and then you would have a chance. Now, right in here, you've backed way off with the other parts. And but you still have loud piccolo and loud clarinets playing in octaves. And that will just blot out the harp, and so will the pizzicato. Even soft pizzicato will tend to blot out. Now, you don't need to do this. See, right in here, you've got an open E string with a little, like this little let it vibrate kind of tie, unending tie, or open tie. So that's really not necessary because the player is probably not even going to bother stopping the pitch. It's just with their hand, like damping the pitch. So that's a bit unnecessary. All right, okay, so so I would say, like, if you took the pizzicato out here and you dropped these melodic lines down to maybe mezzo forte, and you continued on fortissimo with this harp part, then you could hear the harp part pretty well. But then, you're adding more and more weight, right? The harp is really a delicate instrument. It's way more delicate than people realize, okay? And then, like throwing a xylophone in on anything, that's it. The xylophone absorbs the sound of the harp. The horn will absorb the sound of a harp. Clarinets played loudly will absorb the sound of a harp. So just some warning there, all right? So now, let's get to the actual scoring. So, I really like the colors that you are aiming for in these two little sections. And of course, we're kind of addressing a bunch of different concerns in the evaluation criteria, the pitch weight being in the upper middle register of the piano. You solve that problem by making it more generous, by increasing the scope of the scoring. That's fine. The thematic material repeating often, possibly sounding repetitive, you address that as well by bringing in more heavy brass and really kind of changing the nature of the accompaniment at the lowest level. And, it's just really nice. Now, this col legno right here will be pretty much inaudible. It would be better for you to have this being pizzicato. It's just, you get this, you'll sort of hear this tapping sound in the distance. And if you've got strong lower heavy brass right in there and bassoons kind of thumping away down there, you're just not going to hear col legno from your players. So I would say keep it pizzicato if you want that dry kind of a sound. Okay, so there are a few problems in here. There's nothing wrong with having this stopped. That's fine. I would say the bigger problem would be that right here you have got your flutes in like the weakest position and the oboes in the strongest position. So the oboes and the trumpets and the top note of the horns, the first horn right in here, they are all going to kind of overwhelm the sound of the flutes. The flutes will really not contribute very much at all, right? And you're thinking, well, I got the piccolo on this top B, but this is one of the, the first octave of the piccolo is kind of its weakest register. So how could you make this stronger? Probably, I would say, leave out the piccolo until right here. Just have the piccolo player come in here, right? Because this is fine, the piccolo and clarinet and octaves. It all works really, really nice. Leave the piccolo out, have the two flutes playing A2 at the top, right? And then having the oboes, I would say, playing fourths below that. They don't need to double on the top pitch at all unless you want a mixed sound, right? So you could rearrange the way that this is, but you already got the weight of two clarinets on top there. So it is going to sort of, these two clarinets are going to kind of overwhelm everything, right? The piccolo doesn't even need to play there because, and neither does, and not just for the reason of the clarinets, but also the overtones from this sounding B and just the presence of the trumpets right in there, right in that slot. Harmonically will just really overwhelm anything that the piccolo is trying to do, and of course including the flutes. So I would say, like, if you really want the flutes to be heard, I would say you either leave the piccolo in there where it is and have the two flutes A2 on just all on the same line, or have the or just leave the piccolo out. But like right in here, I really love this whole idea, the parallel octaves and fourths. I think that's really, really neat. And then, of course, you backing that up with the triads from below, kind of in parallel motion. That's really, really neat. But I'm not, I don't want to take it away from you, the coolness of this scoring. It's just adjusting certain things so that you're not kind of wasting the player, right? So that kind of leads us to our next discussion, which is the melodic development soaring quite high. You solve that problem with the piccolo and clarinet in octaves, and then this is nicely scored. The way that you're coming in, dropping the first flute down, and so on, and the oboes right in here. That's very neat. Okay. I've already talked about the problem right in here of the accompaniment figures, of the, how you're having to decide whether or not you want to dampen everything a little bit and have the harp come out, or whether you just like leave the harp out of it and have the pizzicato. And I would say if you are going to have the pizzicato, just go ahead and be more generous with the way that it is scored. Like, if you're going to transcribe this somehow onto the pizzicato of the strings, then just like maybe work it out a little differently. So now here you're saying like a guitar. So usually the player thinks of that as holding holding the violin like a guitar. With it basically in their lap and kind of plucking along the side with the right hand. Now that does not necessarily make the pizzicato any stronger, because the pizzicato is already very strong with them plucking with their index finger. It's actually really beautifully positioned with the violin in a normal position. That actually really gives, in some respects, gives it far more weight. Like the weight of the player's arm can actually be involved in the plucking. Whereas sitting in the lap, it's really the weight of the hand that is at play, right? And the thumb is better positioned to play this kind of a thing. So it's just a little stranger for the player. So I would say if you're going to do this, start here, not here, right? Because like you're saying, okay, pizzicato normal. Now suddenly swap the instrument around, right? And then here you give the player almost no time to put the violin back under their chin and then start bowing normally. So if you're going to do like a quasi-guitarra type scoring, then just really give the player way more time to get their instrument back where it needs to be. And if you have a whole section of pizzicato, then just have the whole, don't do half of it normal pizzicato and half of it quasi-guitarra. Have the whole thing be quasi-guitarra because it's just easier than having to, to move the I keep wanting to say guitar, move the violin around and adjust to the new kind of plucking. Now of course, like once the player gets used to it, it's fine. It's really easy to do, and I can say that as somebody who's very used to playing fretboard instruments and playing fingerboard instruments like the violin family, and so on. So I have no problem going in between the two. But for somebody who does nothing but play the violin under their chin, and one score out of 1,000, out of 2,000 asks them to do something like this, you want to give them as much time as possible to readjust. Okay. Here you're saying beaters, wooden beaters, basically. That's all cool. I like this. This is really nice right in here. Okay, and then we're kind of continuing on with our two concerns. This is all fine. I really like the way that you get, that you are doing all the right compromises. Try not to have two different instruments in octaves jump down at the same time, all right? Because there's really no reason why your clarinets need to jump down to F here, right? So to written F sounding D, like you're doing it at the same time as the flutes, and so like people will feel the drop, right? So I would say have the clarinets continue on, and then maybe when they get to about C or so. I mean, there's no reason why the clarinets couldn't just run all the way up to G, or to written G sounding E. Like the first clarinet, you're not really accomplishing anything. It's not. There's nothing drastic about it. You don't need to compromise in your first clarinet part. Now, this, of course, you don't want to send the flute player all the way up to D and E. The D is possible, but the E is just kind of sort of whistling, and it's not what you think it is, right? All right, and then running up here, yeah, this is kind of interesting. I'm going to say that's fine. That's a cool solution, and I like the way that you were having the second violin run into the first violin, and then the viola line runs into the second violin part, and so on. That's all really nicely done. I like that a lot. Of course, like all of the subtleties that you've got here are just wiped out by adding the xylophone. Like the xylophone is such a destructive instrument to any kind of subtlety. It is like the most garishly obvious instrument when played in a big, massive texture like this. Now, of course, like xylophones can be incredibly subtle, and there is a huge array of different effects that are available on xylophone with different beaters, different dynamics, all kinds of cool things. And there can be xylophones made out of different materials. Don't get me wrong, I am not a xylophone hater, but what I'm just saying is when you are in a, like you're doing a gesture like this, or like this where you've got really loud playing, the xylophone just tends to dominate everything, and it makes everything about itself. It's sort of like it's like being visited by somebody you're in the hospital, you got a broken leg up on a pulley or something like that, and you got a thermometer in your mouth, and you've got an IV drip, and your friend shows up, and and then they make the entire visit about them. Right? It's like, getting here while parking was so horrible, and oh wow, these flowers were so expensive, and the candies in the gift shop, wow, I can't believe it. What are they charging here at hospitals these days? Wow, the seat is uncomfortable. Geez, the lights in here, they're just awful. Like this awful, those bulbs are like flickering. When was the last time they replaced the light bulbs here? It's so cold in here, And meanwhile, you're lying on that bed and you're just half dead, right? So that's kind of the way that the xylophone can be in a big texture, right? So like there's all this beautiful orchestration going on around it, and the xylophone is just cheerfully plunking away and making it all about them. So just be careful. All right. That could be another orchestration tip. Okay. So I love the way that you bring this to an end. I love the way that it's really differentiated in the phrasing. You know, yup, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and 3 and 1. That's exactly right. All right. So, is there are textural contrasts between this and what happened before, right? The only thing I would say to think about is, do you want each of these gestures to be scored exactly the same, right? At the same more or less the same groups of instruments, or do you want some kind of dialogue? Yeah da 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 dum bum 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 yeah da 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 dun. Like you could have a conversation here. All right, and then our last concern is maintaining a driving staccato and transitioning smoothly into the next passage. So it really does feel like this could transition into something. Like it does feel like you are leading somewhere. I like the little low notes at the bottom, the double bass and the rolled timpani and so on. And this is kind of cool. The A2 horns. That works together pretty well. So here, just one last comment, and that will be about. Well, okay, I got a couple more things to say about this, but let's talk about the horn scoring. So here you say horns 1 and 3, 2 and 4, right? Okay, that's all good. Like it should be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, because I've already done several tips about this, Gustavo, and you may even own this book, the 100 More Orchestration Tips, when I talk about the roles of the players. And I think in 100 Orchestration Tips, I talk about how scoring 1, 3, 2, 4 can lead to bad habits, right? And, one of which is to not understand the first and second as natural partners. Okay, well, I'm not going to get into it. And if you are a supporter on Patreon watching this, then you may want to check out my my tip about hobbits in the horn section, where I discuss the bond between the first and the second. Okay, all right, well, all that aside, the thing is that you're actually scoring, your scoring here is 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So here you got your first, and then I would say this would be the third, doubling the first. And then here, this F sharp in here would be played like by the second, and then this low B here would be played by the fourth, right? So you've actually scored this a different way than this, right? So this really is more like 1, 2, 3, 4. And right here you have the interlocking A and B, or A and G. That is also, like, this would be the second and that would be the third. It's like you're doing everything the right way for the right kind, the normal kind of scoring. Now here you say A2, and you have both players doing something quite intense. And here I would say, like, and once again, I would actually prefer this to be the first and second, right? Because you have all that really, really precise staccato-y scoring, and it's just really better for players who are going to be doing pinpoint precise articulation to be sitting next to each other rather than one chair away from each other. That's just what I would prefer if you're going to do a big row of staccatos like this, unless it's really high and you just need that, you need that third player with maybe a slightly better trained lip, or, maybe a little bit more used to going up high. Now, all right, so here you have A3 oboes. So the comment that I was going to make here is that this is going to be an intensely thick sound. Just like, I've talked before about the about A2 oboes, right? Having like almost a trumpet-like sound, like a kind of a colder sound, not as, like, the players cannot get as warm and as generous with their timbre because of the because they need to really match each other in their intonation. So this is just really going to feel kind of trumpet-like. And I almost say that, like, you could just have a single trumpet taking over this line. Of course, there is a difference in the timbre, but, like, when you've got all these other things going on in here, right? And especially with the horns playing from below, it just seems to me that like you just need something a little stronger on top there. So maybe instead of A3 oboes, maybe A2 oboes and a single trumpet would work better here. And then of course you're getting down to the very lowest range of the oboe, or not quite, but almost the lowest notes of the oboe, and then you're asking them to go go diminuendo. But I mean, you're starting from forte, you're going up to molto forte or fortissimo, and then diminuendo back to forte here. So I mean, it's all right. It's just, it's not perfect, right? So anyway, other than that, it's just really, really fun scoring. I really enjoyed it a lot. So some things to think about, right? You can. There's some calls that I'm making this that are sort of borderline, and it's more, it's not that I'm saying like I am the king of all orchestration advice, and my word is final, and blah blah blah. People are welcome to disagree with my conclusions, and a lot of times I'm putting them out not as ultimate judgments, but more as like things to think about, right? So like, you've made this decision. Have you thought of the other way of doing it? Or have you thought about the problems involved here? That doesn't mean that the players that cannot do what you're asking them. It more means that that there may be easier ways to get the effect that you want, or there may be a different way of thinking about it that holistically makes a difference. So one last little thing I'd say here is that I would really give this to my first and second player, not to my second and third player, right? Just you want your most confident, in control player up there on that G sharp, and then just bring in your third player, right? And you don't have to say A3 here, because we know, right? There are 3 trumpets. You have 3 voices. We know they're all going to be used, right? So you do not even need to say anything here at all. And then here, sure, you can use 2 and 3 if you want to, but I mean, what's the first there for, right? I mean, why can't the first and second work together on this? Anyway, really fun stuff. Really enjoyed it a lot. It's a really, really great start to this collection of this little box of treasures that I'm opening up right now. So thank you so much, Gustavo. Thanks for your being such a great member of the community and making all those comments on different videos, and you have a real righteous presence, and I appreciate it a lot. Don't think I'm not reading all those comments. I really am checking out what everybody's saying, and people have been just so fair and supportive of each other, and I really appreciate that. And with that, let's take a look at the next entry in this video. Wow. So thanks very much for a really unusual score here, Christopher. So I just really want to make sure, like, especially, with people's feedback and the comments and everything else, like, when you are observing entries that show different levels of experience, that you are respectful to people's area, because we've all been in different places along this road, right? Especially the more experienced kinds of viewers and participants, right? So it's just really, really important that the people who are just starting out are not judged too harshly for having certain errors, and for maybe just trying out a few fun ideas while they are, kind of getting their chops together and so on, okay? So, and if people are unkind about this in the comments, I'll be very disappointed, all right? And also, I'll erase the comment. So, the way that I'll start off with this is just basically to observe, Christopher, I'm not really sure whether or not there's something experimental intended here, or whether or not you kind of got off on the wrong foot with your transcription. Um, I mean, it looks to a certain degree like some of this is maybe transcribed or maybe imported from my XML template, maybe. But like it ended up in 2/4 time, and it should be in 3/4 time, and I think that that's possibly what's confusing you throughout this entry. There are a few things where like the phrases don't quite meet at the right place, and you sort of fill in with a beat or two, and maybe that's intentional. I don't want to I don't want to put it down or anything like that, but that's probably the core mistake, right? So there are like a few simple things you can do to make sure like that things are more readable. Like for instance, pulling down the the bar lines, making sure that we have like bar line groups so that it's really readable across each section. Like for instance here, like the bar line should go all the way down to the double bases, and this bracket should go all the way down to include that, right? And then same thing here. Okay, so the first thing, before I get into any of these issues, my cat wants to sit on my lap. Excuse me. He's this huge tomcat. He's a really awesome guy. Okay, so this is kind of strange. I've never done an evaluation with a cat on my lap. So, the basic thoughts of just looking at this entire thing is that I want to urge you, Christopher, to try to base your orchestration on the string section. Okay, just like start with the string section as your baseline, right? And then add other instruments to that, winds and horns, and then heavy brass as you get better at your orchestration approach, and so on. And I mean, it's really cool what you're doing here with the percussion, and I will talk about the efficacy of what you're asking and so on. There's really nothing in here that I'm seeing that's impossible. But just really try to think of orchestration as a kind of a ground up thing. Ground up. That sounds like I'm grinding up hamburger. As something that you take from the ground level, the strings, upwards to the rest of the orchestra. Okay, so not all orchestration is going to be like that by any means, but you're definitely going to want to think of the strings as being like the one constant in most, for instance, symphonic scoring and scoring of a sort of a general nature. Now, there's just really something really confusing about these numbers. You've got these bar numbers, and I just don't understand them at all. Like here, you've got bar 1 and 2, and then 3 comes in on the 4th bar, and then 4 is on the 5th bar, and so on, and 5 is on the 7th bar. And then here we've got bar numbers, you've got 2 bar numbers, 2 and 3 are on the 2nd bar, and 6 and 7 are on the 5th bar. So I don't understand the way this is working. Maybe maybe there's something about you're trying to say something about the way that the percussion is played. It seems like maybe there was some sort of sequential number thing that was copy pasted across the score. And the other thing too, some of this seems a little bit. I mean, it's reminiscent, like the way that you have got these rests and beam groups and everything. It's really reminiscent of what it looks like when you are entering MIDI data, right? Or you're importing MIDI data, or you're playing directly onto the into your notation application, right? So it just makes it confusing to read. So if this were for instance, okay, so say that these pizzicato notes were written as eighth notes or dotted eighth notes, it would get rid of some of the clutter right in here, right? And and it really doesn't matter, like, you can write in the rests or not, but like it's not necessarily going to make the pizzicato any more abrupt or shorter. Just the same way as tying your pizzicato across the bar like this, you were really not, even at a faster speed, 120 and so on, you're really not going to get the pizzicato in your violin part to last for 3 bars, right? Or for 3 beats. It's really only going to last about a beat and maybe a beat and a quarter, right? So really, like, it would be better for you just to have a pizzicato note and then a rest after it, if that's really what you wanted, right? And then, like here, like violin one, violin what, right? So you got to be a little bit more specific about certain kinds of markings, right? Now marcato, right? That should be marked here, or after, just right after the dynamic in like a smaller type. All right. There's another thing too, is that like a lot of what's in the piano, like the kind of piano original that you've got down here, doesn't really match up with what's going on in the score, right? Okay, so having said that, like, let's say that somebody were to take this score exactly as it is and cleaned it up. There's a lot about it that works nice. You've got your glockenspiel and the flute's sort of doubling, and that's a nice sound. You've got like lower glockenspiel, right? Piccolo on top, right? It kind of doesn't make sense to bring in my evaluation criteria here because they don't really apply in this situation. But yeah, this is all workable, right? And I kind of like this kind of weird combination of melody and accompaniment figure that you've got in the marimba. That's kind of nice. I just feel like, like you've got this pizzicato kind of doing nothing here, and you've got your marimba sort of plugging away at the accompaniment. Mezzo piano, right? So like the accompaniment is really weak here. You've got strong glockenspiel, you've got medium strong piccolo and flutes, and you have this sort of medium soft marimba. So this should be the same dynamic as everything else, and they should kind of all be the same dynamic, I would say. I would mark them all mezzo forte or all forte, right? Including the marimba, because marimba is like one of the softest instruments, right? It's just a little louder than a harp, and that's not saying much, right? Harp, celesta, marimba, those are all instruments that get covered really easily. If this were to be scored out pizzicato, see, like here you start off pizzicato, doubling this, and also the second flute and the piccolo and so on. Like if there were pizzicato, if the accompaniment figure were realized as pizzicato right in here, then it would be way stronger than the marimba playing along. But I mean, I like the idea of the marimba playing along. Be aware that certain things like staccato, like if you really want to get a true staccato from a marimba, then there has to be some kind of dampening, or there has to be a special, the player has to have a certain kind of stroke. The player has to have a stroke, folks. No, the player has to use a certain kind of a stroke. And I should just, if I had time, if I had an assistant, I would have them collating all of the silly things that I said in these evaluations. So yeah, I just feel pizzicato is stronger, but I love the idea of marimba right in there. Okay, and then we're kind of back to this same thing again, but sort of interpreted a little differently. You've got English horn kind of holding a note down. And did you notice how, like, just that one long note from the English horn kind of obliviates everybody else, right? It's like kind of just, it sort of makes them all kind of disappear and forget why they were there, right? So it's just that, and you actually have not given any dynamics to your English horn part or your oboe part, so we kind of don't know, right? But assuming that they are staccato, that they are, that they are maybe, mezzo forte, right? So let's just say that they're all mezzo forte. Even if they're all mezzo forte together, just the sound of this long note here would be enough to just really kind of wipe out a lot of the timbral subtlety of the other parts. There's another issue as well. Right here, you've told me 2 oboes and 1 English horn, and here you've got two English horn parts and one oboe part, even though you've written this A2. By the way, I use a small a, not a capital A. So that's sort of a problem. We kind of have to know, like, what do you really mean? If you handed this to a copyist or to a conductor, they would say, I can't afford two English horn players. Our orchestra only has two oboe players, and then we have like an extra guy playing English horn, and that's already expensive enough. I've got to rent the marimba too. We've got a glockenspiel, and that's fine, and we got these other players. You see what I mean? It's like you really have to be precise about who you're asking for. Meanwhile, like, you could have asked for clarinet and then had the clarinet part, you've got, that gives you more voices, right? So, anyways, going on. Yeah, now here you have two voices in your oboes and so on. I mean, yeah, and then even just like mezzo piano, octave flutes right in here is also kind of tends to overwhelm the other voices to a degree. Just at least the pizzicato. Now here we've got glockenspiel, the kind of accompaniment part. I would say, like, just make this into a quarter note, right? So eighth, quarter, eighth. It's just a lot easier than like assuming, like, see, you're assuming that pizzicato notes can be tied. Usually a tie in a pizzicato would be like when you have a like, say you have a quarter note pizzicato, but they're just like, it comes in that there's like maybe a 16th note value just before, like you are coming in just a 16th note value before you go to the quarter note. So that would be an example of using ties in pizzicato. But here, just like try to have pizzicato be almost like drum strokes, like on a snare. You just try to have it be as simple as possible in terms of its rhythmic notation, okay? And then, once again, that's barely, like, in terms of the tying, right? And just like in general, the some things are sort of messing me up. Right here, you've got this note just jumping up an octave here and there, and the 3/4 time being absent, and the 2/4, so it's kind of, and then right in here you do this sort of wandering episode, which I actually kind of like. So like here you're departing from the script to a degree, and I kind of like that. Like the stuff that you're coming up with on your own is really, really neat. But I mean, do we have to be pizzicato all the time, right? I mean, couldn't some of this be arco, or did you go to arco? And I'm just, see, I'm not seeing. Yeah, it would have been nice to see some bass in here, some cello and double bass, and maybe some bassoon, it's like some bass function would have been nice. But I mean, it's kind of cool, marimba and glockenspiel working together. The glockenspiel is actually not the loudest instrument in the world. It's louder than, say, a celesta, but that doesn't mean that it is intrinsically itself a very loud instrument. And it can be easily covered by other things. So, but I mean, it's kind of cool to have the pizzicato working. I mean, there's some really great ideas here. They just feel a little disorganized in their presentation, just to be completely honest about it. Yeah, and then we get to right here, it just kind of just turns into marimba and glockenspiel all the way. So look, so some advice about this, and that is, like, I think. So I'm going to be, this is going to be a bit of a critique, Christopher, and I hope you don't take it the wrong way, because I feel that, like, you're kind of starting out with this and you've got some really great ideas and so on. But what I'm feeling, though, is that by using marimba and glockenspiel, which are instruments that have a similarity to the sound of a piano, you're making it too easy on yourself, right? I think that like the more that you explore the sound of the orchestra, right, the more of a challenge that is, and like the more that you fall back on the marimba and the glockenspiel, the less of a challenge that is, right? So if you want to grow, to be your strongest as an orchestrator, and especially in taking on assignments like this, then I think you just really have to just really try to avoid things like mallet percussion and so on, because it's sort of an easy out, right? or harp, right? Avoid harp, right? Because harp actually isn't like piano, but it's often treated like piano for developing composers, right? So if you just really want to get tough with yourself and really get the most out of orchestration training at the stage that you're in right here, I would say just really focus on the strings and some winds and brass, right? So I would say like maybe even just really try limiting yourself to the string group, and then maybe flutes, oboes, clarinets, bassoons, and a couple of horns, and maybe timpani, right? So just try to focus in on like the real core, right? And then me as as a orchestration coach, I can give you so much more, right? In terms of feedback in building you towards where you need to be as an orchestrator, right? So I just think that would be best for us both. So I really encourage you to consider entering the 2022 orchestration challenge, right? So think about all those things. Working with a more limited orchestral group that sort of really forces you to think about what an orchestra does rather than things that emulate the piano sound and make it too easy on you, right? And then I think that you will really blossom and really take off. I think that you just, this really feels like beginnings for you, and it's a really nice beginning, and I actually like the parts that depart from the script, right? The things that you're doing that are different from the original are actually much more interesting to me, right? And what that is saying is that, your own internal desire to create may be stronger than your desire to transcribe or adapt or orchestrate, right? So, that's another thing to think about: developing your own voice as a composer and becoming more, like stronger with that and everything else. So, what I would say, where do you go from here? I would say go straight to my MOOC course. That's MOOC, right? It's three O's in a row. So check out, like it's completely free. You do not have to be a Patreon supporter at all. You can take it on your own terms. You can work with a teacher, with a composition teacher. There are some composition teachers out there who are using the MOOC like as a basic part of their curriculum, and just like really learning the ins and outs of scoring for strings and just becoming more confident in it, having those strings express their own creative voice more confidently, right? So I think that would be a next step, right? Now, if on the other hand, like you are way more advanced than I suspect, and a lot of this was just very, very minimalist composing, then I apologize sincerely, okay? And I'm not making any kind of judgment on you as a person or on your level as a composer or anything. But it's just, the fairest thing that I can say is develop your string scoring, really, really work on that, and then I think that you will be ripe for the next challenge, right? But I would say just go straight there, right? Straight to the MOOC course or any other really great teaching materials on string scoring. And then, of course, I've also got an orchestration course on winds and so on, and brass will be coming up in a year or two. But, I mean, you don't have to rely on my resources. There are tons of great orchestration courses out there. It does not have to be me, all right? So, anyways, thanks so much, Christopher. This really gave me a bit of a challenge too in, what to say and to stop just taking for granted, the way that I was giving advice. So I really appreciate that. And once again, I encourage everybody out there who's watching this to be really fair and to try to come up with some really constructive feedback and some stuff that will really move Christopher forwards as a composer and as an orchestrator. And now, on to the next evaluation. Okay there, Franck. That is quite a sassy score I really enjoyed that. It's really, really kind of outrageous and over the top. Okay, so I want to make a couple of comments about notation and about some other things before we jump into it. And there's one little thing that I'm a little unsure about, and that is, it seems to me that you've made changes. You've either made changes to this score after you exported your after you exported your mockup, or you didn't send me the change version of this, right? Because you have this one kind of low note. It sounds like it's in bass trombone, and then it like jumps down an octave, and it doesn't seem to be here in these bars. All right, so let's talk about the notation issues. Okay, so like there are some spots in the original piano score that show the note of B coming in a little bit early before the beat, right? Okay, the problem with that is you cannot really transcribe that meaningfully exactly the way that it is written onto the this should have been one of my cautions, right? I'm just really realizing now, right? See, because like the thing is that the player is hitting the E fifth with the top part of their hand, and that is the accent. And then their thumb is hitting the B right afterwards as the second accent, right? So that is actually where the accent is. The accent that is sitting on the principal note represents the thumb hitting the B, right? Just like this. So you've got, like, this would be the second finger of the pianist, and then this would be their thumb hitting that. That is why there is an accent there. However, like, the thing about it is, like, if you have all of these players coming in slightly before the beat, where is the downbeat, right? Like, if everybody is tying the B, practically, except for, like, clarinet and timpani, and you got this snare drum here, and like then of course like the two oboes, but like all of these notes are being tied, all of these sounding B's. So like where is the downbeat, right? That's the problem. Like everything is coming slightly before the beat, and it just tends to make things messy. Also, you've got a tie with an accent at the beginning and at the end of the tie, right? So how does that work? Is the player going da-dun? In that case, you have to get rid of the tie. Are they going da-huh? It doesn't really quite make sense at that speed. Duh, 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 duh. I mean, it's that's almost the case where it should be some sort of portato. Like maybe like having a like a slurred tenuto marks, right? Rather than the way that this is scored. So it's just a transcription error, right? It's just taking the top B, having the accent and the tie and everything else, right? And not taking into account that thumb note, right? So anyway, so this is showing up in a lot of scores. Sorry, I'm not meaning to pick on you, Frank. It's a really great score and there's a lot of fun stuff in it. But I'm just sort of pointing out this one problem that we've got, and it shows up in other places, right? The idea of the important note starting before the beat and so on, right? Okay, so that's one problem. Now the other thing here is like you really write out your glissandos. There's sort of almost no way that the player is going to have the time to finger all of these notes separately, right? So it's better to deal with this as a glissando. So you have the starting note, and then just like however long that is, and then you have the top note, and then you slurred, then you have the glissando line going down to here, right? So that essentially this is a glissando. Then here you have like more of an arpeggiated thing, and you're not getting into these really, really fast note values. So that's fine. Sometimes there are ways of enharmonically tuning these chords, right? These arpeggios. So like I'm not sure that you could do it with these particular pitches, but like say that this were an F sharp, then you would have F sharp and then G flat tuned to each other, and then you would have the A natural and so on. and then B and C flat, right? And then you'd have the D, and then you just start the whole thing over, or say this was D sharp, and then E flat, and then you start the whole thing over again on F sharp up here. So, like, there are ways of that they don't work for all chords though, so it probably wouldn't work in this case. But I mean, this will work hand over hand. It's nice and fast. It's not impossible, but like right here, that just really feels like a glissando, more or less. So if it is a glissando, it probably should just be marked with a line, and then you've got the tuning. You sort of put a pedal diagram right here, and so on. Okay, but still, this is really great harp scoring. I'll have some comments though about what it is doing to this passage, right? It may not be the most ideal thing, especially with the xylophone dropping out. So now let's jump to the evaluation criteria. All right, pitch weight in the upper middle register of the piano, with no pitches below C, you get around that. You start to introduce lower and lower stuff going on, especially in whatever the thing was. I didn't quite see with those lower notes. Anyway, so that's not a problem. The problem of thematic material repeating often, possibly sounding repetitive, if orchestrated exactly the same way throughout. Well, I mean, it really is similar, but like once again, you had some changes in your lower heavy brass. What if you held back on some of your bigger gestures here as well, so that like the heavy brass would be more of a change, would be a more obvious change, right? And I'm not really convinced by the way that you left out the upper strings here, right? Like there are a few spots where you have got something going on and it's great, and then you just stop, right? Like here, like the support of the bassoons for the accompaniment figures, what happened to them? What are they doing? Like they're not getting in the way of your other gestures going on here, but by taking them out here, that's weakening what's going on there, right? So, anyways, this is just a few things I'm just really not sure about. All right. But, other than that, I mean, very, very dynamic and fun and gutsy and so on. I feel like you would get like a better effect here with A2 bassoons on these two lower pitches, and then just throw in this as a A2 clarinet thing, right? It's just like, you're just sending your first bassoonist up there into that G sharp and A, which is perfectly playable, but I mean, it's not all that powerful. You're saying you want this player to compete with the notes that are just up a third from there, and then like this trombone and the bass, right, which is just basically going to blot everything out. So you get a better chances with a mixture below, a better balance. Now here you have like 3 trumpets going on, and I can really hear it in the sound set as well. I mean, it's so pungent that I would say that this would be more a better mix if it were up an octave, like if the second violin were doubling the first violins, right? And then throw that back in here, so that you just have some more balance. And then here, like, where does it start and where does it end? Dun 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 dun. Like, are you jumping to the first trumpet on the second note? It's just a little unclear with the way that this is scored. Maybe you intended that number 1 to be right here. Okay, so I mean, it works in a really kind of sassy, out there way, but yeah, the thing I'm worried about here is yadda-dum-dum-dum. Everybody else keeps on going much, much softer. Bum, 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 bum. So I mean, if you really want that drop off of like the melody continuing on, you just have to be aware that is the consequence, right? You will just lose. And look, I mean, you are being conscious of continuing on the overtones, right? Like you got the A2 doubling with the piccolo and everything else. So I mean, you're compensating in some ways, like then throwing the clarinet in there, but it is nowhere near as powerful as a fortissimo first trumpet, right? So this is not going to compensate in any way. It's going to be continuation of the line in some of the character of the overtones, but it's not necessarily like a follow through, right? Okay, so that takes us to our next concern, which is bum 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 bum. So what happened to the end of the line? It's just xylophone, right? And some viola. So I think you could keep going with your piccolo. I don't think it would hurt anything. Piccolo and maybe one or two of your other wind members, right? I mean, I like the idea of just letting the xylophone take it over, but maybe just a little thickening from the piccolo, and maybe like first flute an octave lower. So you are, so there is a lot of thought put into that. I appreciate that, right? Now, if we look at, the same way, like we're the same concern in this other 4-bar section. So mezzo forte subito, right? And they should all be mezzo forte, because otherwise the strength of the winds right in here is just killing this right in here. And it should all be the same dynamic, because like you're making the accompaniment, that's sort of really cool accompaniment figure, softer than like the melody. And the melody is really, really overpowered, right? I really love this trill right in here. I think that's really, really cool. Very original. Yeah, and all pretty awesome right in here. Your xylophone coming in there, but like here's the thing that the xylophone sort of poops out, right? Like it's fortissimo, so you just like everybody else is going, okay, all right, now we're gonna build all together with the harp, and the xylophone is just going, hey, it's all about me, right? If we're kind of continuing on the metaphor that I used was it the last evaluation or the one before? So so I would just say like maybe you left out mezzo forte subito here, and then crescendo, or maybe just leave the xylophone out if you're not going to continue all the way to the end of the phrase, because you really feel its absence here. The way that you've got it scored here, it's just like, oh, suddenly it's gone, and then the this sort of running up, this kind of 4-octave run that you've got is being overwhelmed by the sound of the harp. And I know that sounds silly, right? But like just a glissando is a powerful thing, right? And if the other instruments are sort of just basically playing a scale, then maybe they're a little too weak, right? What if the piccolo dropped down an octave from here, right? And that way you had a nice, beautiful straight line all the way on top, right? And so it would be doubling the flute here, and then the drop down here of pitch to the first violin line would not be so noticeable. But like with both of the instruments dropping down at the same time and this G, like you lose your ceiling of pitch, right? So it's better just to have one straight run rather than going, like here you're going all the way up to F and then you're ending on an E. So it sort of takes away the idea of like the climax of the top of the phrase. All right, so going forward, I think this is all really fun. I mean, really, really strong trumpets right in here. That's so powerful. Ah3. I mean, do you really need all three? You could get away with just one, and that would balance out with everything else that's going on. And what if you stayed at forte, right? And then still forte. This doesn't take anything away from any of these other parts. Bum, 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 bum. And that would balance with fortissimo winds. And what's going on here? I can't hear this. Nobody can hear this, right? It's too soft. You're going, But like, if you want this to make any kind of impact, it has to be fortissimo to match everybody else, right? Especially the brass. Like the brass are just going to basically blow these strings out of the water, right? So they're going to make almost no impact on the balance of the music here. So I would say just, yeah, maybe you're going to have this diminuendo to piano, that's fine, but start fortissimo. Start at the loudest dynamic of everything else. And, you get a further balance by taking some of these louder instruments and bringing them down to forte as well. And then you have a nicely balanced thing. This should be fortissimo. These A2 bassoons. And just being aware, of course, that pushing A2 higher than around middle C in bassoons in a very exposed part, right, is a concern. Not that it will be all that audible with the trombones playing at the same time, but yeah, it's just you might get a better effect out of just playing F octaves here, and like just get rid of the grace note and just go F octave, D octave, and then it makes the bassoon stronger. All right, now the very last little bit. Yep, up, 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 up. I really like the fact that there's some differentiation here between the parts. Like you're ending with the brass, which is really basically what most people are going to hear here, anyways. And then the winds sort of take over into this kind of mad race to the end. And most of these, you're kind of keeping everything in its stronger register. And the flutes and the piccolo get a little bit low here, but I mean, yeah. I would say that if you had the clarinets higher and they were competing with what's going on with your A2 flutes here, then it just would be, you might as well not even have them, right? But the way that you've scored it all out and the gradual introduction of the strings, I think that works really nicely. And then this right in here, bringing the brass back in and just a little bit of xylophone at the end. Yeah, I mean, that's all great. And then like this right here, once again, good. It's really good harp scoring. So it's just, I would say, bring down the English horn part a little bit. All right. So, yeah, maybe mezzo forte there. Everybody else piano and the harp nice and strong, and then you really will hear the harp doing its job right in here. Okay, so that's kind of all I had to say about this score. I think it's just really strong and fun and fierce and just really powerful. I think you put a lot of thought into the scoring, the way that it all works together, and everything else. So I'm really happy with this, and as I've been mentioning throughout this set of evaluations, it would be great to see what you do with the 2022 Orchestration Challenge score, because it's going to be completely different from this, right? It would bring out another side of your orchestration, and it would really challenge you to do something different. And I am looking at it and I'm saying, wow, I don't know if this is going to work. Maybe I'll have to orchestrate it, and maybe like nothing will work, and I just realize that it's not really, it just has to stay being a piece of piano music. But I'm actually really hopeful that it would stir the imaginations of 150 people, maybe maybe not 300 people. I don't think it would take me a year to get through. All right, so thanks everybody. Thank you, Frank. And now on to the next evaluation. All right, Declan, that is some score. I really love these triplets right in here. It's just beautifully Spanish sounding in a kind of a characteristic way. Just really kind of brings out the more kind of dramatic sound of the cinematic bullfight, right? So yeah, it's a very strong score. It's got a lot of cool things to it. A few things that you might not have thought about. For instance, I'm not really sure if the B octave here, you've got a piccolo and clarinet in E flat carrying the B all by themselves, plus like the overtones of the instruments below them, like third oboe and first horn and so on and so forth. This written F sharp sounding B, and I'm just not sure that that's enough to, because like you've got so much weight on E and G sharp, right? We've got both flutes, we got first and second oboes, we've got clarinets, We have got like the trumpets below. Yeah, I'm just not sure that this is enough. Just like clarinet in E flat is very strong in that register, and of course so is piccolo. But it's just, with everything else around them, is that enough, right? It's kind of cool. I'm not sure why you have. Okay, I see why you have D trumpet. Okay, yeah, yeah. Okay, so aside from a couple of little qualms like that, I think it works really, really great. So let's just go straight to the website entrant evaluation criteria, which I've got up on my other computer here. So pitch weight in the upper middle register of the piano, not a big concern. Thematic material repeating often, possibly sounding repetitive. I mean, you make some changes in to the second iteration, right, with these lower notes, and also with the harp. So that sort of takes us to a whole question of like how much of this harp is really feasible, which I probably should have started with. But I think that the funny thing is that the triplets come through really nicely in the mock-up, and my feeling is that turn this into a grand staff and have and just having, instead of just having triplets going bum, having them like really kind of cover a lot more ground, maybe like pentuplets or 16th notes or something, but just really have a beautiful ripple throughout the range of the harp pitches. I think that it would be a lot more audible, and also instead of just making this kind of a marcato note, making it a big rolled chord instead of just 3 notes, maybe 6 to 8 notes, right? Then the harp has got a chance of being heard against this massive, mighty tutti right in here. I mean, anytime that you have got horns pushing into their upper register and trumpets and trombones going yada da 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 da, the harp really has almost no chance. But I mean, the motion of the harp right in here is keeping it in the game, right? So, even if you did these simple triplets here, and you had maybe some arco violas kind of covering that line or something like that, if there was some doubling that, if you decided to free up your clarinet, maybe like to double the harp line in here or something, if there was some way of keeping that motion from to like keeping it out there so we could hear it, I think that it would make it more worthwhile and make it more audible. Now, right in here, of course, like unless everybody drops down to like say mezzo piano, including and especially your stopped horns, then it just really is almost impossible to hear anything from harp here. And you've got all these pizzicato strings doing nothing, right? Just sort of sitting there checking their iPhones. So, okay, so just a little comment here. Like, it might feel exciting to score these quadruple stop and triple stop brackets, right? Just like, just really plucking it with my 3 fingers, my 4 fingers. The problem is that actually a rolled pizzicato is going to stand out more against trombones, right? Like when you've got these massive trombones in here, and then like everybody else kind of blasting away, it just makes it difficult to hear all this. Like the strongest thing you could possibly score here would be really simple octaves and fifths, right? That would be the like playing like like maybe playing an E octave or a B octave, right? In some of these instruments, that would give you the biggest sound, the most able to compete with this. But that doesn't mean you still you could have a chord. I'm trying to think like what would be an effective chord. D E. I could say so. Like you could have a chord, G sharp, E, B, and then open E above, right? So you could have that, you could have that big rolled chord in one of your violin groups, and then that would actually stand out more than just like plucking all 3 notes at once. So anyway, so just kind of maybe rethink that a little bit, I would say. Okay, but really just massive, massive, massive textures. So the next concern, melodic development soaring quite high. So like here, you just have completely nailed it in your piccolo, and I really like the way that this is in the oboe and E flat clarinet instead of in flute, right? Taking things down in flute into an area where they're really just really not that strong, right? And here the piccolo really becomes more active towards the end. One thing I would say that you could do to strengthen this up even more is to have your first and second flute playing A2 doubling with this, right? And then when you get to about F sharp, maybe drop down to double the oboe line. Of course, you're throwing xylophone in there, and as I mentioned before, like a lot of people are choosing xylophone and it's cool, but like xylophone makes everything about themselves, right? That they are the person who comes to the funeral and announces that they're getting married, and here's their spouse who you've their fiance who you've never met, and they brought their family too, and they're going to have a picnic after the funeral, and they start handing out invitations, right? That is the piccolo. So excuse me, the xylophone, right? It just makes everything about themselves. So if you have this beautiful, strong orchestration underneath it, and you really want it to come out more than it is, or just the notable features of it to be more salient, then maybe the xylophone isn't such a great, like you have this beautiful stack of like D trumpet. I mean, the D trumpet is like the coolest thing in this, right? And then you've got your other stacked winds and so on. And then the xylophone just comes in and just like, there was trumpet in there, I think. I can't remember. But that xylophone line was really great. And then you can continue on here and people will be saying, like, what happened to the xylophone? Right? I was gonna go to that wedding and that picnic after the funeral, right? So just be very judicious and very careful about using the harp. I mean, about using the xylophone. Sorry. This works really well. That's fine. I would say you could start even lower, right? Part of the problem here is that we don't have a grand staff. So like, if you were gonna do a glissando across an entire bar, I would say start as low as possible and end as high as possible, right? Because otherwise, it's almost like a scale of like playing very fast notes that are individually distinguishable, right? Which just drives the harpist crazy because they can't really get a rolling start and just really rip through the strings. All right. A similar caution that I've given other parts is to not have everybody jump down at the same time, right? To have this happen at staggered times. It's kind of like everybody having these really, really incredibly long ties, where obviously there's no possible way that you could hold one single bow stroke over an entire page of one tied note, or you could hold your breath for the entire thing. So everybody sort of has to change breath and change bows and so on and so forth. Well, what if everybody changes their bows and takes a breath on the same note? Like all of a sudden you hear this from everybody, or change of bow. So I would say the same thing in a line like this, where you're trying to disguise the fact that certain strings are dropping and certain parts of the line are dropping down. So just stagger it. All right. But I mean, other than that, I really like the way that this is scored out. Very nice. Keeping the flute in the strong place, right? And then jumping down to double the oboe before it gets too high. All right, so I kind of have this question here. This is something that is starting to arise, and that is, where does the next part, where does the next rhythmic phrase start? And it doesn't start on the downbeat. You're not going yappa dappa 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 bum 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 da 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 dun. You're going dappa 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 1 2 3 1 2 and 3 and 1 2 and 3 and 1 2 and 3 and 1. Do you see like that? Like this is really setting up the downbeat each time, right? And kind of this almost a little whiplash right there. So to overemphasize the downbeat, like to have all of the notes running up to the same E, right? Is the problem. Like whereas if you ran up to the highest E possible and then dropped an octave, then there's more differentiation at the beginning of the next phrase, right? I mean, it's a small point. You can take it or leave it, but it just might be a better way to justify bringing in the brass on the second beat, right? Because otherwise it sort of feels like, well, why didn't you bring in the brass at the beginning of this phrase, right? Well, you made this the beginning of the phrase, then why are the brass there, right? So it's just a way of like having everything make more sense, like in a kind of a phrasing way. Yep. Yeah. I mean, this all works great. This is fine, And you do. What's really lovely is that it's not just that you have a textural contrast between this and the previous passage, but you have textural contrast between this and other things, right? I think that those would be stronger by trading off to different instruments, like in the string section. Like, for instance, if you have, ya da 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 on flute, right? And then here on your E flat clarinet, like maybe changing over to the seconds, ya da 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 da. I mean, it's a subtle thing. But kind of changing things around wouldn't hurt. And maybe even this part right here could be played on high violas, just to have some kind of, some kind of changing over. But I mean, of course, this is the strongest way to score it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that you have to do that, but it's just one possible way that you could get more contrast in between these little motives, right? Okay, and then and yeah, that's all fine, And setting up whatever the next phrase is. I think in this mock-up, you can't really hear the. I guess these pluses are not activating the stopped sound in Note Performer. There's an added problem here that I would say is just, instead of having the second play and then the first play and then the second and the first and so on, it'd be better just to leave this to two players, right? I mean, possibly the best solution of all would just be to have, since this is identical and it's stopped pitches and stop pitches are notoriously weird, just have the entire thing played A2 by your first and second. Right? I think that just makes the most sense. And then, you're coming in here. This is all fine, the way that it's scored. And then here you're saying second, just playing one single note. And that's all right. I mean, I would have to see what this led into. All right. But maybe this could be a little softer, would be my thought. It just really kind of sticks out like a sore thumb. And of course, this will stick out way more than you think it will, sounding stopped. Just that really kind of a sound. I mean, check out the spectral analysis in my 100 more orchestration tips of the difference between a normal horn tone and a stopped horn tone. The stopped horn tone has hugely suppressed the body of tone, and then it has these huge spikes above our range of hearing, so that you're getting all of that force. All right, so yeah, very cool score, Declan, and thanks so much for the time that you spent on that and making it part of this orchestration challenge. I really do appreciate it, and thanks for subscribing to the website. And there will be some interesting stuff coming up in the next newsletter. So thanks all for sticking with us so far. But you know what? There are even more really, really cool evaluations coming up. So stay with me and let's just go on to the next evaluation. Such a cool score, Karl. Just really enjoyed that. I really love the chamber music quality here. And, I mean, some of that is being exaggerated by the sound set that you're using. I think that if this were played through Note Performer, you'd get a more orchestral sound, and some certain aspects of balance would be a lot clearer. All right. Well, just to kind of look at this the way that it is, let's go through the evaluation criteria. I actually just released a video in the middle of doing the evaluations for this group of scores. I kind of took a quick break and released the video for midday, and I'll be releasing another one in a couple of hours. Okay, so before we launch into those criteria, let's talk a little bit about the role of the harp here. Okay, so the harp actually works good, but you could make it work better, right? Like, here's a problem. Pizzicato tends to absorb the sound of the harp. And in fact, I just wrote down in my notes for 100 Last Orchestration Tips, Volume 3, that there will be a tip about harp timbral absorption, right? So just like you can even have really nicely balanced proportions, and the harp still won't sound that loud or that unique because of other instruments around it, like horn, for instance, is notorious. Another one is vibraphone, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But like the main concern really is like if you've got pizzicato and harp working together, the pizzicato will almost always outweigh the harp in any decently proportioned section. Now, if you had like maybe just 3 players in each of your violin groups, and then maybe 2 violas, 2 cellos, and 1 bass player, that would be a different story. Okay, but in your average, say, 16 firsts, 14 seconds, 12 violas, and so on, the pizzicato of that amount of strings is going to completely overwhelm the harp. So the way that you get around that is to have like a big gushy roll, right, rather than just like plink, right? So like if you just want this sound, right, to be simultaneous, you just want that plucked sound, then the thing is just give it to the pizzicato violins is fine. And I would say, like, give it a tenuto mark instead of an accent mark, and have the duration of the note be a dotted quarter note, right? And then you'll get a nice longer sound. Something similar to this. But if you really want the harp to stand out, make it a bigger chord and make it roll both times. And then right here, like, the weight of the pizzicato is going to be so much greater than this little plink that it would be better to make that into a vibraphone note, right? Pluck, 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 pling, pluck, 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 pling. It just would be way better on vibraphone. But then throw in this glissando. I love downward glissandos. I have to be careful to not turn them into cliches. Now, here's another thing, is if you are going to have this sort of softer chamber music approach, then why do you need to have accented fortissimo, right? Why does it need to be so gosh darn loud, right? How about if it's just loud, right? Forte. And then you can take or leave the the accents, and I like the idea of the tenuto on the 8th note, but I think tenuto on on this melodic note sounding B, I think is a little much. Because you're really asking for it. You know what I mean? It's just a little much, right? I think it's better as dun 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 dun, right? I just think it's just a little too stompy on the melody to throw in that, right? But this is cool because like you're making it a short, full note that is only this long, right? That works great. All right. So I would just say back everything off to forte, and then the harp comes through beautifully, right? So stay fortissimo on the harp, forte on the pizzicato, right? And then this is more nimble. I would say drop the dynamics here, right? So like you're cruising along at forte here, and then jump down to like maybe mezzo forte, and then throw in some nuances, right? And then also drop this down a little bit. throw this to your vibraphone, and then you can crescendo up to forte, and then you're back to forte. Now, there is a concern in the evaluation criteria about doing exactly the same thing twice, and you avoid that. You add a few touches here and there. You got the vibraphone in there. You got the you got your B flat clarinet tracking the like where the E flat clarinet part was at the octave, and bringing in the flutes. Right now here's the thing though. Like, second flute is going to be buried by first clarinet. Now here you don't need to write one, because we know that it's the second voice down here, right? So second clarinet, continuing on, we know that this is first, if you put that right in there. Now here, maybe, right? If you didn't have this there, then maybe. But I mean, it's pretty clear that this is the first continuing on. All right, so, but back to this. Second flute will pretty much be absorbed by the sound of the of the first clarinet, right? So it would probably be better just to have two flutes up here, or just no second clarinet at all, right? If you want a nice mixed sound here, then it would be better to have, like, I don't know, oboe, or or maybe like your E flat clarinet could be playing low into its throat tones as a doubling, which would give you more of a phased sound. But I think this right in here, the second flute scoring is not the strongest. Okay, and then here you're saying secco. You want these really, really kind of dry hits on the vibraphone, and I would just say, like, just don't have the pedal down, right? And put some staccato in there, and I think that it'll be fine. Now, like, we're getting into here, like just how much can the harp really support, right? I mean, you've already got vibraphone, which is another instrument that can absorb the sound of the harp. I would just say make your pizzicato bigger, right? And you don't have to worry so much about the harp, right? And if you really do want the harp sound in there, make a big roll, just like I said before. And then that will contribute more. All right, now right in here, like, once again, remember how I said drop the volume here? Same thing. Drop the dynamics down. Let's say that you were at forte before, right? And then just drop down to mezzo forte or mezzo piano. I love the idea of the piccolo and the vibraphone and harp working together in this very simple way. That's really nice. Yeah. Works very, very good. Okay, and just the vibes right in there, E flat clarinet, and so on, the flutes and the piccolo. So just so long as there isn't anything else going on here, you don't add anything on, then this low vibraphone line is fine, right? But like, low vibraphone is one of those things that just gets sucked into everybody else's game. Like, if you were to have, let's say, bassoon doubling this right here, or violas, right? They would just basically take away anything that is all that exceptional about the sound of the vibraphone right in there. Now, right in here, the sound of the E flat clarinet will really be dominant almost all the way through here, because it'll just get more and more pungent and piercing as it gets higher. So the flute doubling with it is just a little bit of sweetening, and almost completely useless right in here, but leave it in. All right. And then I really love the way that this is individually phrased, like you're not starting the phrasing from the downbeat here. Bum, bum, ba, da, 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 da. And, once again, harp is a little bit out of its depth here. You have such powerful scoring from everybody else. I would say, like, if you take my advice and you go forte, mezzo piano, or mezzo forte, same thing again, then crescendo to fortissimo here, right? So then you have something nice and strong, full. You're going to arco violins, and so it's absolutely the right place to do this, right? But in that case, the harp is useless at that dynamic volume, right? And the only way that you're going to get the harp to be heard in this area is to have huge, big rolls. Or even little glissandos. Right? That's the only way the harp is going to contribute to a fortissimo right in here. And you already have a big enough problem with making the vibraphone be heard, right? Because like vibraphones are not that loud either. Like a vibraphone's fortissimo is like a mezzo forte for the rest of the orchestra, or poco forte even. So so I would just say, look, this is similar to advice I gave a couple of evaluations ago. Do not let harp or mallet percussion sort of stand in for functions of a keyboard, right? Just really make the orchestra do all the work, rather than like the substitute, the stand-ins for ideas that look like they can be expressed on keyboards and mallet percussion or harp. Now here you're saying secco, okay, that's all good, but I don't think that this is audible unless you go to octaves. So I would say just leave all of this out in harp and vibraphone, unless you're doing just straight octaves, pling pling pling. Then here I would go to just octaves, ting 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 ting, and I think that would be more audible against the rest of what's going on here. And this is really fun. I like the way that you are keeping this, really up higher. The thing the problem you're going to run into is this, all right, and that is the absorption. I'm using the word absorb a lot, all right? I'm like a big tissue paper advertisement. The absorption of the flutes by the first is going to be a concern here, right? So the player's going to have to play out a little bit if you really want that flute on top kind of a sound. Or of course, if you just want it to sweeten the sound of the first, once again, this is good right here. First, right? It's a continuation of the line, but we do need to know going on that is the first flute. All right, so that's all right in terms of the scoring. All right, so that works, and then of course, the E flat clarinet being the partner from below, all right, that is also very, very cool in harmony. And then you've got your strings tracking from below in octaves, and that's just really, really fun. I think that's nicely done. And then we've got bassoon and cellos coming in together, a little bit of vibes at the end. I think that all works really, really great. So anyway, those are my thoughts about this. Okay, I think it's actually what I love about it is the elegant simplicity and the scaling things down. So you're scaling down your sound picture, and if you're scaling down your sound picture, scale down the dynamics. Just going to this triple F in both E flat clarinet and piccolo, it's like stabbing the audience in the ear with an ice pick. You know what I mean? It is just a really intense, shrill, and especially with an accented staccato, just bam, you're just smacking the audience in the head. So, think about my way of understanding triple F, right? So forte is loud or strong. Fortissimo is extra strong. Triple F, forte fortissimo, is as strong as you can play on your instrument and still sound musical, right? So that is pretty darn strong. Now, quadruple F is as strong as you can play on your instrument and not worrying about being musical, right? So your instrument can screech and drag and scrape and whatever, right? That would be quadruple forte. And then forget about, I guess, quintuple forte would be like a bomb going off, right? So in that kind of a scope, it would be better to have forte, right? And then you can have your harp be louder, more part of the picture. The vibraphone, with everything scaled back here, the vibraphone has a better chance of coming through. And you don't have to push this so loud. I would say push it up to forte, not triple. It's already going to be piercing and loud, right? Both instruments. I really love the handoff here. That there's a lot of stuff I didn't even really need to say about my evaluation criteria because the score is so different. It just comes out in the parts. I feel that the proportions are really nice, so it doesn't really. I shouldn't belabor it, right? But one last little note here, which I think is extremely important, is how you scored the dynamics here. Forte for the vibraphone, one of the softest instruments in the orchestra, and fortissimo for everybody else, right? That should be flipped, right? It should be the vibraphone that is loud and the other instruments that are a little softer. And the same thing is true with the harp, right? The harp should be, like, if you want to balance in kind of louder textures, you need to back down the other instruments. But you might still want to score, more grandly for your harp. Big rolls, more glissandos, more octaves, more, things that really allow the harp to compete with everything else that's going on. And then I think you got a shot. And it's a strong score. It's, already sounds fantastic the way it is. It just needs to be brought into line so that it's ready for the stands, right? So great work, Karl. This has just really energized me just to, see how different everything is and how stimulating that is to me as an orchestration coach. I just cannot wait to wrap all this up in the next evaluation. So please join me for that. And now our last score in this group, and I love it that it's just so different. That's so energizing. Just a wonderful, almost like what they used to call an album leaf back in the Romantic days. There are a few weird things, and I'll talk about them now. Just some overall ways of shaping this score up a little bit. First of all, let's talk about. Did you notice how this note was staccato, but you had a tie, right? So just watch out for the for importing all of the, just checking to see that you haven't overdone it on the on certain articulations and so on. So I'm actually looking at the template. I've got it right here on my other screen, and there is no staccato here. So yep, up, 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 dun, 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 dun. If that's what you intend, just end with an eighth note here, right? Don't throw in the tie, because you sort of, every time you hand a really, really great player a contradictory articulation, you're making their life more difficult, right? So do you want me to tie or not? Right, is what they'll be thinking here. Okay. Now, you have a lot of sort of extra musical suggestions here with hidden mischief, sounding uninterested, feeling cocky, and so on. Look, that is all fine and dandy, but you have to think about how you're going to be marking things in the future, right? Like when you don't have time to say certain things like that, right? So how are you going to get the music to just have that quality in it automatically, right? So, I think even just telling the player, it's already kind of forte, staccatos, accents, and everything. It already is essentially marcato, right? So you could just basically just say, forte, mischievous, right? Or whatever, or forte, playful. Just try to keep it as simple as possible, because the problem is that while this may seem to be very specific, everybody has got a different idea of what cocky is, right? And some of this is very subjective. And sometimes, people will just have attitudes in your orchestra and just sounding uninterested. What does that mean? Blah, blah, blah. I'm just going to sit here and play with absolutely no vibrato and just make it sound boring. Well, okay, maybe that will get you the right kind of reaction. Maybe that's what you wanted, right? But it might be better just to say, mezzo forte without nuances, right? That kind of thing. So just try to keep everything as like, as straightforward as possible. Now, a few other little things. The incomplete tie. I think you should just indicate exactly how long you want the note to sustain, right? So if you want this note to sustain to the downbeat, then just write in a tie to the following B, right? Because it's barely going to sound as long as a quarter note anyways because of pizzicato being so dry, especially up there on the A string. Or, excuse me, the E string. And, and then here you've got staccato on pizzicato plus a tie, an incomplete tie. So what does that mean, right? So this is also where you're adding your name to the thousands of tiny little names written on the different gray hairs of your second violin players, right? So some of them are Tchaikovsky, some of them are, maybe more modernistic composers, but you don't want to be that person that like, oh no, what does he mean, right? So just like, in the first place, don't put staccato and pizzicato unless you really mean an incredibly abrupt sound, but it doesn't really have, this is just an accompanying part. There isn't anything all that special about it, right? So just leave out the staccato. If you just intend this to be a fuller note, maybe just put, like, and same thing here, instead of putting the incomplete tie, maybe put a tenuto mark on it, right? That's a much better approach. So here you're saying that you want the second string to play this A as a harmonic. That's not possible. But I mean, it is possible just to play it as an open A. That would be like the most satisfying sound there, anyways. And then here, I mean, you could get the you could get this A right here to be a. I think you know what, you copy paste it, or like, so this would be on the first string, not on the second string, as a harmonic. So I'm just not really sure what you were intending right in here. I don't know why you drop out your accompaniment right in here, right? So shouldn't the cello keep going? There are a lot of dropouts in this year's entries. Like there will be, something like this. It won't continue on, and there's kind of no reason for it to be missing. All right. So I've gone over all of those notation things enough. Let's okay, so here you want third string. So why not just let them play the open D here? I don't understand. All right, so let's go to the evaluation criteria. I think since this is such a light-handed interpretation, the rules really change. Like what I would expect from myself with this approach would be completely different. So, the fact that you have thematic material repeating and so on, the pitch weight in the upper middle register for these two parts, and that's all fine, right? And I really love the way that you're using bassoon and pizzicato and so on, and the this little oboe solo right in here. That's all real fun. And then you kind of do the same thing again. Yeah, bum 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 bum. So why couldn't the oboe player go all the way up to E, right? Or somebody go all the way up to E? Like maybe the piccolo could sort of take over and then just, but somehow I just feel it needs to complete itself. Now here you're saying subito fortissimo, so there's everybody, like, unless the last dynamic was piano, there is no need to say subito fortissimo, right? It's just you're just starting on fortissimo. Everybody knows where they are, right? So I understand the context here is that you just want things to feel suddenly strong, and I think that's actually great. And speaking, this is something similar that I sort of said to Karl before. I really like the idea that that you are holding back on the dynamics on this kind of more chamber orchestra kind of score. I mean, look, it is a chamber orchestra, right? Look, you've got one of each, right? I mean, like you do have two flute players and two oboe players, but they're just single wind lines, right? So yeah, so I really like the idea of the fortissimo right in here, and I really like the really well defined phrase starting on the second beat here. Bum bum bum. You don't need to do this with the down bow and everything like that. So see how would I? Yeah. See, so the bowing pattern is going to be down, down, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, up, down. Anyway, so you don't need to do this. You don't need to write that in. Right, down, up, down, up, down. I see where you're coming from here. Right. Yeah. You might even get a better thing if you put in two up bows here, like down, up, down, down, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, up, down. Yeah, I mean, look, just leave it to the string players. They'll work it out. You know what I mean? Here I am. I'm thinking like a concertmaster. I was one very, very briefly in a student orchestra, but even at that, the conductor of the orchestra gave me like zero responsibility. I was supposed to provide an example to the other members of the orchestra and how good I sounded, and I just didn't practice enough to really satisfy that particular thing. Although, I mean, I could have. I was a pretty good musician back then. I think I could have held on to that position if I really, really tried, but I didn't have that much incentive. I wanted to be a composer more than I wanted to be first violin at the student orchestra. Anyways, so I think that this all works really nicely. Don't worry about the bowing. I like the idea of the textural contrast right here. I think that's really, really important. I think that works fine. I like the idea of the driving staccato right in here. It works really, really super. I would say the dynamics are a little weird, though. I think that the dynamic change should be here, right? Ba-da-da-da-dum, 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 and then here get softer, and then get louder and then softer, because that's what Falla wants, right? He wants to push into this. And here's where he wants things to be marcato, right? Not necessarily here, but here. He says molto marcato in the piano part, right? And he wants to increase in his intensity and then back off to. I like the fact that you give me a bar here so I can see if you're connecting nicely, and you are. It's nice. I like that little timpani stroke. Just a quarter note here, not a half note. And there's no need for you to mark the melody louder than the accompaniment, right? In this kind of scoring, it should all be the same dynamic level. Okay, so really great score. Wonderful way to kind of bring everything to a close. Yeah, I mean, just real exciting. Some really great ideas. I love the use of the brass right in here. Just you've got 4 beats of brass, and I was thinking, oh, geez, there's so much more I could offer in terms of analysis and everything else. But I think that you're playing it right? The only thing that I would say is, like, you've got piccolo sailing above here, and then here. So this is really going to sound loud at fortissimo, and then the sudden lack of any kind of doubling from above in the violins, the audience is really going to hear that drop out, right? So that's something that you might want to think about. Like, do you want to bring in your clarinet and double at pitch, or I mean, are there ways that you can smooth this over, or maybe just not have the piccolo there? Byum 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 strings, and then maybe piccolo, strings, right? That trade-off would also heal over that kind of strange drop-off. Okay, well, I could I could pick this apart all day, really. I just really am enjoying this. But yeah, so just watch out for some of those things. Really, really fine score, though, Everett. I mean, just like everybody else, I really wonder how you would do with the 2022 entry, and maybe consider taking on a longer portion of that score as well. Because I just feel like I just see so much kind of growth here, and just some really great ideas. I think maybe just a little bit more work on on some score reading of string parts, and just the way that the section works together would kind of clear up some of these possible misconceptions. But anyhow, but other than that, just really a really fine entry. So thank you, Everett. Thank you, everybody who has stuck with this video all the way through to this point. Thanks to all of the other contributors to this group of entries. And just like I said right at the beginning of this video, please comment on each other's entries. Wouldn't it be great if each of these group entries had comments from just right on the YouTube page of people talking about each other's scores, and maybe making some constructive suggestions, or even just saying, hey, I really liked what you did there and here's why, right? I think that would make a huge difference. And so far, I've been really, really happy at the amount of comments. The only thing I would say that could be possibly improved is that some people are making way more than others. There might be one person who just said one thing or another, and if that's all that you're able to say right now, that's fine. But if 5 people are commenting on your particular score, you should probably make 5 comments to individual scores of other different contributors. That's just the way I feel about it. So thank you so much, everybody. And I think I'm just going to go evaluate some more scores now, but maybe after lunch. See you guys very soon.